Okay, let's, yeah. It's going to be fun.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Everyone ready?
Yeah, so 1 minute.
Okay. Oh. Is that an owl? Oh, sorry, Sam, was that you?
Yeah, well, that was me. My bad.
Oh, I did see an owl around here the other day, actually. It was just over in the park. Yeah, don't see him often.
Okay, guys, cool. Can you make sure you're mute now, then? Just when you're not speaking?
Right, yeah.
Of course. Okay.
Cool,
Yeah.
lovely. Nice one. Okay, good luck, guys. Switching to the live stream now.
Hello and welcome to Peculiar Productions' Haunt. This is an adaptation of short ghost stories by Charles Dickens, Sheridan Le Fanu, and Charlotte Riddell. There is a long-standing tradition when the nights get longer and the weather colder of coming together around a fire and telling ghost stories. These tales of fright allow us to be scared in a safe environment and then laugh at those fears because, of course, ghosts don't exist. Charles Dickens could be said to be the father of this tradition. As well as A Christmas Carol, he would publish stories by himself and other authors in a serial paper. Our story tonight imagines Dickens, along with Riddell, Le Fanu, and his wife Susanna, meeting together in an old house to indulge in this pastime. They sit around the flickering light from the fireplace just as you're gathered around the light of your screens tonight. So please, turn down your lights if you dare, and be prepared for Haunt.
And now, if you will all draw closer around the fire, I will explain to you how I came upon this place to host our little winter gathering.
Let me just fetch my drink. Lovely.
Under none of the accredited ghostly circumstances did I first make acquaintance with the house. I saw it in the daylight, with the sun upon it. There was no wind, no rain, no lightning, no thunder, no awful or unwanted circumstance of any kind. It was a solitary house, standing in a sadly neglected garden, a pretty even square of some 2 acres. It was uninhabited. A lopsided board drooped over the garden wall, announcing that it was to let, on very reasonable terms, well furnished. It was much too closely and heavily shadowed by trees, and in particular there were 6 tall poplars before the front windows, which were excessively melancholy, and the site of which had been extremely ill-chosen. It was easy to see that it was an avoided house, a house that was shunned by the village, to which my eye was guided by a church spire some half a mile off. A house that nobody would take, and the natural inference was that it had the reputation of being a haunted house.
Oh, good gracious.
I walked on into the village with the desertion of this house upon my mind, and I found the landlord of the little inn standing his doorstep. I bespoke breakfast and broached the subject of the house. Is it haunted?
I'll say nothing.
Then it is haunted.
Well, I wouldn't sleep in it.
Why not?
Well, if I wants to have all the bells in the house ring, with nobody to ring, and all the house doors in the house to bang, with nobody to bang them. And all sorts of feet treading about with no feet there, why then, I'd sleep in that house.
Is anything seen there?
Ikey! This gentleman want to know if there's anything to be seen in the poplars.
Hooded woman with a howl.
Do you mean a cry?
I mean a bird, sir.
A hooded woman with an owl. Dear me. Did you ever see her?
I seen the howl.
Never the woman?
Not so plain as the howl, but they always keeps together.
Has anybody ever seen the woman as plainly as the owl?
Well, bless you, sir, lots.
Who?
Well, bless you, sir, lots.
The general dealer opposite, for instance, who's opening his shop.
Perkins? Bless you, Perkins wouldn't go nigh the place. No, he ain't overwise, Perkins, but he ain't a fool as that.
No, Perkins certainly knows better than that.
Who is, or was, the hooded woman with the owl? Do you know?
Well, they say in general that she was murdered, and the howl hooted all the while.
This very concise summary of the facts was all I could learn. I had lived in 2 haunted houses, both abroad. In one of these, an old Italian palace, which bore the reputation of being very badly haunted indeed, and which had recently been twice abandoned on that account, I lived 8 months, most tranquilly and pleasantly. Why, how many things had bad names undeservedly, and how easy it was to give bad names. Do you not think that if I were persistently to whisper in the village that any weird-looking old drunken tinker of the neighbourhood had sold himself to the devil, he would come in time to be suspected of that very commercial venture? To cut this part of the story short, I was piqued about the haunted house and was already resolved to take it.
How splendid. It is indeed the perfect setting for our soiree.
And have you seen any hooded women stalking the corridors?
Not a one. Nothing supernatural whatsoever. Anyway, it is not my turn. I believe it is Charlotte who should be recounting a tale tonight.
It is. Well, I have one. I had it from a landlord who had bits of it from the people of the village and the squire's own housekeeper.
Of course.
Hush.
We begin with Squire Ennismore. He was a terrible man. You couldn't lay your tongue to the wickedness he had not been in the forefront of. Drinking, duelling, gambling. At last, he did something in London so bad that he thought it best to go home and live among people who did not know so much about his goings-on. It was said that he wanted to try and stay in this world forever, and that he had some secret drops that kept him well and hearty. He could hold foot with the youngest, and he was strong, and his eyes were like a hawk, and him near upon 70. The March before he was 70 was the worst March ever known. Such blowing, sheeting, snowing had not been experienced in the memory of man. One blustery night, some foreign vessel went to bits on the headland. They say it was an awful sound to hear the deathry that went up high above the noise of the wind, and it was as bad a sight to see the shore strewn with the corpses of all sizes, from the little cabin boy to the grizzled seaman. They never knew who they were, or where they came from, but some of the men had crosses and beads, so they were all buried decently in the chapel graveyard. There was not much wreckage of value, but one thing did come into the bay: a puncheon of brandy. The squire claimed it. It was his right to have all that came in on the land, mind, and there was sore ill will because he gave his men nothing, not even a glass of whiskey. It was the most wonderful liquor anybody ever tasted. The gentry came from far and near to take share, and it was cards and dice and drinking and storytelling night after night, week in, week out, even on Sundays, God forgive them. They would sit emptying tumbler after tumbler till Monday morning came, for it made beautiful punch. But all at once, people quit coming. A word went round that the liquor was not all it ought to be. Nobody could say what ailed it, but it got about that in some way men found it did not suit them. For one thing, they were losing money very fast. They could not make head against the squire's luck, and it was a hint was dropped that the puncheon ought to have been towed out to sea and sunk in 50 fathoms of water. It was getting to the end of April when first one, and then another still, began to take notice of a stranger who walked the shores alone at night. He was a dark man, the same colour as the drowned crew lying in the chapel graveyard, and had rings in his ears and had an ambling sort of gait, curious to look at. Many tried to talk to him, but he only shook his head so as nobody could make out where he came from or what he wanted. They made sure he was the spirit of some poor wretch. People got that frightened of the man, or appearance of a man, that they would not go near the sand, till in the end Squire Ennismore, who had always scoffed at the talk, took it into his head he would go down one night. Out he goes, bold as brass, and there were a few that followed him. The man came forward at the sight of the squire and took his hat with a foreign flourish.
I have come, sir, to know if you are looking for anything and whether I can assist you to find it. Is it the vessel that was wrecked you're distressed about? Well, aren't your ship, you know. It went all to bits months ago. And as for the sailors, they are snug and sound enough in consecrated ground. What do you want? If anything belonging to you went down with a vessel, it's about the edge you ought to be looking for it, not here. Unless, indeed, it's after the brandy you're fretting.
The squire tried him in English and French, and then in a language you'd have thought nobody could understand, but it seemed as natural as kissing to the stranger.
Oh, that's where you're from, is it? Why couldn't you tell me so at once? I can't give you the brandy because it's mostly drunk. But come along and you shall have as stiff a glass of punch as ever crossed your lips.
That was the first night they conversed together, but it wasn't the last. The stranger must have been the height of good company, for the squire never tired of him, and they drank and played cards till cockcrow, talking and laughing into the small hours. This went on for weeks and weeks. One night in July, on the eve of the squire's birthday, when there wasn't a drop of spirit left in the puncheon, not as much as would drown a fly, the squire and the stranger came out into the hall. It was a full moon and light as day.
I'll go on with you tonight by way of a change.
Will you so?
I will.
It is your own choice, you know.
Yes. It is my own choice. Let us go.
They walked along the sands. They walked on and on and on till the water took them to their knees, and then to their waists, and then to their armpit, and then to their throats and their heads. Living or dead, Squire Ennismore never came back again. Next morning, when the tides had ebbed again, one walking over the sand saw the print of a cloven hoof that he tracked to the water's edge. Then everybody knew where the squire had gone, and with whom.
Oh, ghastly.
Simply diabolical.
Delightful. Well told. I'm sure we shall be tossing in our beds tonight.
It is getting quite late. I think I will go on.
I will join you shortly, my dear. What is it, Susanna?
A figure by my bed. Oh, Sheridan, it was so tall and the light so dim. A dark figure standing here over me.
And so I found Susanna quite inconsolable, Charles. I endeavoured to reassure her. The room once again looked so cheerful in the candlelight that I was quite uninfluenced by the contagion of her terrors. I set the whole thing down as a dream, or an imperfectly seen outline of the bed curtains.
I know what I saw, Sheridan. I was awake as I ever was and am now. Something was in that room.
Thieves? They must have some secret way into the house. Smith told me that he had seen someone, an ill-looking woman, our first night here.
Oh!
I will call up the man to hear from his own lips the particulars of what he has seen. These past few days, there's been glimpsed a retreating figure in the passage which leads to the coal vaults. It is always seen with its back turned, generally getting round the corner of the passage in a stealthy, hurried way. When followed, it is imperfectly seen entering one of the coal vaults, and when pursued into it, nowhere to be found. The servants have been talking about stories of smugglers having secret ways into the house, which they use with a view to frighten superstitious people out. There is suspicion of similar practice here. It has caused unease among them. The men, however, made a most careful examination of the area with a view to discover some mode of egress, but entirely without success. On the contrary, subversive of the theory, solid masonry met them at every hand.
Master Dickens.
Smith, my good man, tell us what it is you saw the night we arrived here.
Very good, sir. My son was sleeping soundly in the room, but I lay awake, as men sometimes do on a change of bed, and having things on my mind, I observed a light and some little stir in the room, and so turned around. I saw the figure of a woman, squalid and in ragged dress, her figure rather low and broad as I recall. She had on either a cloak or a shawl, and wore a bonnet. Her back was to me, and she appeared to be searching or rummaging for something on the floor, and, without appearing to observe me, turned in doing so towards me. The light, which appeared like the intense glow of a coal, being a deep red colour, proceeded from the hollow of her hand, which she held beside her head. I saw her perfectly distinctly. She appeared middle-aged and was deeply pitted with the smallpox and blind in one eye. She was a miserable, poor-looking creature. I was under the impression that she must be the woman who had been left by the proprietor in charge of the house, who, after having given up the keys, remained for some little time with the female servants. I coughed to apprise her of my presence and turned again towards the wall. When I looked back, she and the light were gone. The circumstances excited neither uneasiness nor curiosity in my mind, until I discovered the next morning that the woman in question had left long before I went to bed.
Good gosh! Dickens, why did you keep this to yourself?
I am afraid I did not want to startle you or your good wife, my friend. Although now I see this may have been foolish, although good-intentioned. I myself have seen and heard nothing. I believe perhaps Smith had been mistaken and half-dreaming. That morning I heard a great deal of fantastical stories, and I may have prematurely dismissed the idea of there being any real danger. Smith, would you please invite Mrs. Canmore in? I believe I hear her lingering by the door.
Should we wake Charlotte?
No need to trouble her. Mrs. Canmore, you have heard the night's commotion, I'm sure. We are trying to ascertain what exactly has taken place. Would you be so kind as to repeat the account you gave to me of your nighttime visitor?
I have had a bedroom on the kitchen floor with Miss Gray. I tell you this is to bring to mind the whitewashed walls, and to remind you, to tell you that as to bring to mind the whitewashed walls, and to remind you that Miss Gray is a particularly fearless and scrupulously religious woman. There is the shadow of a woman who nightly passes and repasses across the side wall opposite our beds. We suspect it has been going on for much longer than we are aware, as its presence was discovered by a sort of accident, its movements happening to take a direction in distinct contrariety to our own. The shadow always moves upon one particular wall, causing us much terror when it returns. We placed a candle so close to the wall that the flame all but touched it, and believed for some time that we had effectually got rid of this annoyance. But one night, notwithstanding the arrangement of the light, the shadow returned, passing and repassing, as heretofore, upon the same wall, although our only candle was burning within an inch of it. The shadow seemed to have no sort of relation to the position of the light, and appeared to manifest in defiance of the laws of optics. Miss Gray has agreed with my account in every particular of what occurred. That very morning, after giving our report to Mr. Dickens here, we moved ourselves into one of the smaller, although less comfortable rooms, and have seen nothing since.
You have never seen such disturbances in other areas of the house?
No, miss. Although I had it from the nurse when there was one employed here. But the nursery is not without its annoyances, though of a comparatively trivial kind. Sometimes at night, the handle of the door was turned hurriedly as if by a person trying to come in. And at others, a knocking was made. These sounds occurred after the children had settled to sleep, and while the nurse still remained awake. Whenever she called to know, "Who is there?" the sound ceased. But several times, and in particularly the first, she was under the impression that they were caused by her mistress, who had come to see the children. And thus impressed, she had got up and opened the door, expecting to see her, but discovering only darkness and receiving no answer to her inquiries.
What in heaven is this?
He is back! Oh, Sheridan, help!
Hush a moment.
There is a woman in my room. She was so pale, all in black with black hair hanging loose. And she looked so sorry and frightened. There was something very peculiar and terrible about her eyes. She was dead, I'm sure of it.
Now, Charlotte.
She was. She did not look at me, but instead stood in the middle of the floor, staring in the direction of my bed. There was a dark streak across her throat, like a scar with blood upon it. She turned once, twice, slowly and without appearing to be conscious of my presence, like a person in vacancy or abstraction. The nightlight still burned in the chamber. I saw her with perfect distinctness. I got my head under the bedclothes and being unable to move for horror. And when I peeked again, she was gone.
You have excited yourself. All our talk of spirits has finally shaken you, Charlotte. Perhaps the dinner was a little heavy this evening. Here, we will light some more candles and talk about more pleasant things, and you will all see there is nothing substantial to this. Mrs. Canmore, could you please bring us through some warm apple cider and... Oh. Wait. Who are you? Sheridan? Charlotte? Do you see? Just there, someone standing just past the door. Tell us who you are. Now!
Charles, don't.
Guys, I'm really sorry, but something really weird is happening.
Sorry, everyone. We seem to be experiencing a few technical difficulties. If you just bear with.
That knocking sound is coming from inside the flat. There's someone here. Stop the stream!
It should be paused already.
Loz, are you okay? What's happening? Loz?
Can someone phone him?
He's not answering.
Sam?
Yeah.
We're still live.
It's not me. Everything shut down my end.
I've got it up on my screen now. It's all... Tony? There's someone behind you.
What do you mean? There's no one.
Tony? Tony!
Guys, is anyone still there? Just stay calm, okay? Hold on. I'm just going to...